Discussion and possible action, including direction to the Executive Office to perform operational feasibility of proposed Measure B funded facilities. Supervisor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Recently, this board approved the contract, the $3.3 million, contingent on the Measure B Oversight Committee also finding support. And for me, it raised a concern about the operational needs of the facilities. And I would like to see us develop a financial plan, essentially a business plan, to show that we can operate whatever it is that we construct. One of the worst outcomes here is a county that has done what no other county in the state has done to look out for the needs of mental health. Constructing those facilities and finding that we don't have sufficient budget to open doors would be tragic. And so to keep us on track and make sure that we plan buildings that are in line with services that we can provide, I think it's essential that we put together some projections. I went back and found a report that this board approved. It was titled Analysis of Proposed Behavioral Health Crisis Continuum Facility in July of 2016. And I'd like to read one of the quotes from that document. Quote, while the proposed facility could provide a central location for many behavioral health services in Mendocino County, some of which are currently provided outside of the county, the projected additional costs to Mendocino County to operate behavioral health programs at the facility would place a significant strain on current county resources and force a likely redirection of resources from other county needs, end quote. It goes on to project $9.7 million in operating costs, half of that being reimbursed by 91 realignment, 21 realignment, MHSA, et cetera, leaving the hit to the county general fund at $4.85 million. Seeing that Measure B has an ongoing revenue of $1.8 to $2.1 million, of course, we would fall short. We would be looking for additional funding sources. Rather than wait until this becomes a problem, I would like to begin tackling it now. As soon as the agenda came out, I had some correspondence with Jason Wells, president of Adventist Health Mendocino County, and I see he's submitted a letter that memorializes some of what was discussed. Essentially, he points out, rather than waiting years for services to be provided, Adventist Health is willing to step up and be a partner with us to begin providing those services now, making available 16 beds split between Ukiah and the Coast, assuming they take operations of Coast Hospital in April or maybe March of next year. And they're open to remodeling and doing what it takes to provide those services. I think that there's a public expectation that services begin now, not years out. And this is a way to do it within budget while we build longer-term facilities.
Supervisor Haschak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think Supervisor Williams brings up some good points. I also think that we need to be looking at not just the financial implications of all the operations, but also the human resource component of it.
Staff.
With whether we can staff it, whether we're training people, whether we're doing the college courses, or having some kind of career and technical education to get some mental health assistance, and those kind of positions that we're going to need moving forward. I do think that the proper course for this would be to send this to the Measure B committee and have them consider it and come up with what they consider, because that's their emphasis and focus, and I'd like to see them chime in on what they think is the best route forward. Anyway, I think it's hopeful that we're getting communication with Adventist Health too.
Yes, and the Behavior Health Advisory Board has discussed with the college a psych tech program, or psychiatric nursing. And they actually came back with information that the closest college that offers a course is Napa. And of course that coincides with State Hospital. Supervisor Jurdy, and then we'll go to Supervisor Williams.
So I think this agenda item points to the fact that we have, I would say, conflicting information that's coming to us. We have information coming to us at times from Health and Human Services that all's well, we can proceed with the proposals that are going to the board, and there'll be funding for all 3 types of facilities in the county. And then we have some independent reports, such as I think that's probably the Kemper report, the first of the 2, that's saying there will be a shortfall. And that was before Measure B was passed, actually in 2016, with the 1.8 million to 2 million. So what I would like to see is, one, an outreach to Adventists in a way that isn't prohibited by the RFP or RFQ process. My concern is partly what happens with the county government is it gets hamstrung by state laws, and so that entities can't talk to each other because we have this very formal process, and anybody who's in that formal process can't talk to each other outside of the process. So if we're not yet in that process, I'd like the county to be outreaching to Adventists, because I think they are the obvious partner here in the county. But the other is, I think we need to get some consensus on what will it really take to subsidize these services in the county, because right now I think we do have conflicting information. I don't know that we want to limit the input just from the Measure B committee. I think as the chair brings out, there needs to be some input from the Behavioral Health Board, who have been working on this issue much longer than Measure B committee has even existed. But then also our staff need to be coordinating the information. But ultimately, we need to get some kind of consensus on what it will actually cost to deliver these services, and I don't think we have that consensus right now.
Thank you, and Supervisor Haschek, hopefully Mendocino College will do these vocational programs. We've heard about the need both for emergency services, for our ambulance and the training that's needed, and, you know, psych tech program like we used to have with Mendocino State Hospital. Those trainings are essential, and many times it means having them local that people can take advantage of. So I just wanted to finish my comment. I appreciate that. Supervisor Williams.
Jason Wells at Adventist pointed out that having some of these services provided at a hospital makes sense. It's a better service than having it separate, because a lot of mental health patients need other services, lab services, other medical services that can only be provided at a hospital. When I toured the Nevada County CSU with staff, they made a strong point that the CSU was placed on hospital grounds because they were able to walk patients across the parking lot from the ER, reducing the intake of mental health patients 80% at the hospital. That model doesn't work so well if the facility is a drive away. I like the idea of asking the Measure B Oversight Committee, but I think the buck stops here. The Oversight Committee's job is to make sure that we spend public money, part of this measure, appropriately. But I don't know that the Measure B Oversight Committee has the resources to provide the type of financial analysis, and they're not aware of our budgeting process nearly as well as our own staff. In talking to other counties, it became apparent to me, I'm not going to quote them, but the numbers are staggering what other counties spend on these services. The CSU alone may be outside of our budget without a hit to the general fund, significant hit. I was hearing numbers close to 3.8 million for just one of the facilities that we talk about in our current plan. And then last, I guess I would like to ask the CEO, does the executive office believe that the 1.8 to 2.1 million is adequate to staff and operate the facilities that are described in the recent contract that went out for $3.3 million in planning?
Supervisor McCowan, and then we'll go to the CEO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support Supervisor Haschek's suggestion that this be referred to the Measure B Committee. I think that makes sense because we have the intersection of several interrelated ideas. So this board has approved, conditional upon the Measure B Committee's approval, the contract with Nocton Lewis. Meanwhile, we're told that the grant for the crisis residential is at risk. We've known that for some time. We're hopeful that gets worked out. But there may be a need to proceed with that issue sooner rather than later. The choices for where it could be more limited. maybe Knockton Lewis doesn't have to do all the work associated with that in the RFP. And then finally, we have this information from Adventist Health that they're very interested in participating and being able to provide some of these facilities, arguably much more cost effectively, both for initial capital cost and then for ongoing staffing and operation. So I think these items as a package should really be referred to the Measure B committee for their discussion and recommendation back to us.
I'm going to go to Supervisor Haschak, because there may be some more, and then the CEO, Supervisor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess this is a question directed towards the CEO, is that now that we have Isabel Gonzalez as our program manager for the Measure B, would this be something that would be under her purview to do this kind of research, or is it just dealing with facilities?
Okay. Ms. Angelo.
Chair Brown, there have been multiple questions that have come up over the last 90 seconds, so let me start with the last one and move backwards. Isabel Gonzalez started yesterday. She was a great candidate, and she will be a good project manager for Measure B. I hesitate to throw major projects at her until she understands the full breadth of her job. If this is something that she can do, she will do it as far as the research. I think that it's a much larger job than one person. So our project manager will be intimately involved in everything that is Measure B. But she really needs to learn the job and before she does anything else. So I hope that answers your question, Supervisor Haschak. Regarding this issue before us, this is circular in many ways. So the first of all, the $500,000 grant. My hope is that the Measure B committee will make a recommendation to this board to move forward. As it stands right now, this board is not doing anything until Measure B makes a recommendation. And so hopefully they will do that. The county will not lose $500,000 that could go for mental health services or facilities. That would be unfortunate for all of us and certainly for our mental health community. Regarding Supervisor Williams' first question about the studies and the services and all of that, this is something that the Measure B committee and mental health staff and executive office staff and the sheriff, we have been looking at for the last couple years. I will agree with Supervisor Williams that when you look at this study that was done in 2016, it was clear back then that there's no way that we can provide all the services that are either needed or that this board would want to provide with the Measure B dollars. And 1.8 million is not going to do it. It's just not going to do it. We knew that. That's not a big surprise to anybody. So the question for this board, and you are asking this, is what exactly can we afford within the parameters of the Measure B money? And so part of the direction or recommendation from the Measure B committee, which is, it was 14 months of going back and forth, and the sheriff could attest to this, before we got to the point of making the recommendation to this board to move forward with the feasibility study for stabilization, residential, and the psychiatric facility. All of the work that went into that request for proposal included mental health services, the actual clinical services, and that was through the Health and Human Services Agency and their mental health consultant. So, my point about it being circular is we keep discussing the same thing, the same issues. So, at this point, is there enough money in Measure B for operations? Is 1.8 million enough? It's not enough for what we would like to do and what we need. The feasibility study was going to come back and state how much it would cost for all three of those services, whether it was one building or three buildings or three modulars, whatever. Right now, we're stalled. We're not doing that. I believe that the Measure B committee will want to to access the $500,000 and not return that to the state. So most likely, you will get a recommendation after December 18th to move forward with the CHAFA funding and what that entails, which I believe is residential. Is that right, Janine? Okay. So, so at this point, to do a study, a cost analysis of what it would cost for those three services, we could work with the information that we have. Does anybody think we're going to afford operations for all three services? No. So that will be a decision that would come to this board, and you would have to decide once you got the cost analysis of what it would cost to build the buildings, if that's what we're going to do, and then the services. So at this point, I don't know if I've answered your questions, but that's where we are. And it will depend, you know, at this point, you're pushing it back to the Measure B committee for recommendations.
That
And
meets on
hope-
December 18th.
on December 18th in Willits. And my hope is that they will make recommendations. We have a full agenda for that meeting right now. So if you want the Measure B committee to consider anything, I will need the exact language, and then we will bring that to the Measure B committee, and my hope is that they will come back with a recommendation for this board, which would be in January. And the January meeting of this board, we could bring the CHAFA item back to this board with the Measure B recommendation. And then hopefully that will give our behavioral health director enough time to get to the state, and hopefully the Measure B committee will recommend that we move forward. Thank you.
So we'll be looking at that item possibly on January 7th.
We will bring, yes, Chair Brown, we will
First meeting
bring
of the
that CHAFA item back to this board during the during the organizational meeting, because it's critical.
I have two supervisors, so you may not have answered all the questions that would like to speak. We'll go to Supervisor McCowan first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the previous study that was done, which did, of course, come up with some pretty high numbers for what the potential ongoing costs would be, the validity of that report wasn't universally accepted. And
Chair Brown, if I may, Supervisor McCowan, are you talking about the 2016 study that Supervisor Jurdy brought up initially and that was directed by this board, or are you talking about the Kemper numbers? Because there was 2016.
the first,
Okay, so you're saying that these numbers are not valid? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
they were not universally accepted.
Neither
you
were
know.
the Kemper numbers or any other
Yeah,
number
so-
that we've brought forward.
So that aside, I think that based on everything under discussion here, so you're saying you're hoping there'd be a recommendation from the Measure B committee on moving forward with the crisis residential, right?
With the 500,000 CHAFA dollars,
Right.
yes.
And presumably that would occur at Orchard?
You know, yes, that would be Orchard.
There's
And
not
I
a lot of
believe-
other options if we're going to go quickly. So
and I-
then,
That's what the Kemper report,
Aside from that, I believe that was the original agreement with the
Agreement
state, and I
with the
think that
state
at the
as well.
last meeting, that's
Yes.
what the state wanted. They want Orchard Street.
so if that facility would go forward at Orchard, that blows a big hole in what we're asking Noct and Lewis to review for $3.3 million. If it's realistic, if this offer from Adventist holds merit, and on the face of it, it's certainly worth considering because it would save a significant amount in capital cost, which could then go towards future operations. So I think the $3.3 million for Noct and Lewis really is called into question if we're already, that contract was supposed to help the Measure B committee and the board decide where are these facilities going to be located in part.
But it was
If we're
more-
already deciding where they're going to be located, we don't need the $3.3 million on Noct and Lewis. That could be either negotiated down considerably or a new RFP.
Supervisor Jurdy.
I'm hoping that between now and December 18th at the behavioral or the Measure B committee, the county staff and perhaps I don't know if there's an executive committee of Measure B, but some key people from Measure B could be in a conference call with people such as Lee Kemper to go over these numbers, because they're being asked to make some pretty hefty recommendations at the December 18th meeting. I think there should be more people brought into the discussion.
Ms. Angelo?
So just if I could get back to Supervisor McCowan's comments, the goal would be to pull out a crisis residential, and that would be with the CHAFA grant. And so that would be separate. And whether we would need an architect at that point, I don't know. I mean, there's been so many changes here, I'm not quite sure. So, and regarding Lee Kemper, we certainly could contact Lee Kemper and see if he has availability to talk with us. Though I will say there, again, whether, Supervisor McCowan says these numbers are in question, maybe they are, I don't remember. If they were, certainly Lee Kemper's numbers were in question, if you remember that he sent a follow-up letter because there was some concern about his numbers. So we could certainly bring Lee Kemper back into the picture if he's available. I think that December 18th is right around the corner. The agenda for that meeting is jam-packed, and we're trying to reduce down that agenda so we could actually get some decisions made. I don't know if who would speak with Lee Kemper. I mean, we could see certainly the chair of Measure B and anybody else, but and I'm not certain honestly what that will do. I mean, the point is that somebody has to make a decision on something, or we really are going around in circles.
Supervisor Williams?
Supervisor McCowan took the words out of my mouth. I think we don't want to lose the $500,000. We now know the location for the residential. With that checked off, it leaves the PUF and the CSU. We see that Adventist Health may be a partner for those types of services at a much lower cost, more timely. I think we want to carry that forward. Last, I do want to involve the Measure B Oversight Committee, but what we're talking about is exceeding the available ongoing funds of Measure B. That $1.8 million will not provide the PUF or the CSU operating costs, either one of those. And so it's a question of how much general fund can we commit to indefinitely. And that's not a question that the Measure B Oversight Committee can answer. That's our job. We have to decide how much we want to commit to from here out to provide mental health services in the facilities that are built by Measure B funds. And so maybe the report from 2016 didn't have valid numbers. We need to get those valid numbers. That's what this item is about.
I'd like to go to public comment. Anyone that would like to comment from the public, please come forward. State your name for the clerk.
Jan McGordy. I just wanted to comment on the different types of facilities that were mentioned. First of all, the crisis stabilization unit, I wanted to also clarify that I was with Ted Williams when we toured the Nevada County facility. I just finished writing a report on that if you're interested in it. And this is what we found on other CSUs, is when they're on hospital grounds, it's really imperative because CSUs don't take all clients that come to the ER. They don't take the violent ones, they stay there. For example, regarding the crisis residential treatment, that the CHAFA grant could provide $500,000. That was their condition at the meeting. I didn't finish my report. Their conditions were that it be on the Orchard Street location and that a signed contract be with an architectural firm. My question was, can that be pulled out of and a separate contract written just for that without going through another whole RFP process? Because like Supervisor McCowan said, if that's the space, we don't need to do a feasibility study on it. That's where it's going to be. And the third thing was we've had a PUF unit here. We've had a psychiatric facility, a psychiatric health facility, and it failed. And so my question is, why haven't we called in the people that were involved in that to find out why it failed and to see what it would need to be successful in the future? Finally, as Supervisor Brown stated, our board has presented a letter to the Mendocino College requesting that they institute a psych tech program, which, according to our understanding from their presentation, would be a satellite of the NAPA program. So also I just heard today where they don't have an EMT program. So I'm thinking it might be a really good idea for supervisors or the county staff to reach out to the college and get them on board with providing education that we need in our county. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public comment?
Morning, Madam Chair and Board. Tom Allman, Sheriff. And I'm speaking as the sheriff, not as a member of the Measure B committee. I want to remind us of history, of why did the PUF close? I've certainly studied that long before Measure AG and AH and Measure B were on the ballot. Closed for 3 reasons. Closed. The first easy card to throw down was money. That was an easy card for people to say, well, they didn't have enough money. But that wasn't really it. It was staffing. It was government staffing running a mental facility, and county-wide, when you talk to the other counties running this, the ones who are running it with county government employees are almost always in a deficit. And there are private companies that run them that seem to be doing much better. And while we can approve or disapprove of private companies doing this responsibility, numbers don't lie. And it seems to be working in other counties. While I appreciate this being called an operational feasibility study, thank you, Supervisor Williams, I'm going to make it much easier for people to understand by calling it a business plan. And if any of the 5 of you believe that we don't need a business plan, I will publicly challenge you and tell you you're wrong, because we need a business plan. And to say that we need to go to the Measure B committee to ask if we need a business plan is stalling the inevitable of, yes, we do, so now can we start with one? Let's start with getting this motion approved. And Supervisor Haschak, Supervisor McCowan, I have a lot of respect for you. I do. You come from a school district, you're a lifelong resident of this county, sir. We have to have this. And we don't need to have a rubber stamp of saying, let's get it. Let's move on this today. Let's move forward. The citizens do not pay taxes for us to generate interest in a savings account. We need a solution. And if we don't have a business plan, it's with the cart is before the horse at every level. And I would encourage all 5 of you to show the citizens, the 83% of the voters who approved this today, that you support the business plan, or whatever we want to call it today, because we have to have it. And the studies that you're looking at, we have to ask, were those government employees, were they private employees? And we have a new project manager. We have the resources now to start moving forward. So let's not kick this off until the year 2020. Let's not kick that can. Let's make a decision today. Let's give the citizens something very happy to talk about, that we're moving forward. And the business plan that we need is going to be voted on by all 5 dedicated supervisors that we have in this county. From the bottom of my heart, from law enforcement, thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else? Public comment? Seeing no one come forward, it's back to the board. Supervisor Williams.
I would move the recommended action.
Well, second.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, with all due respect, yes, we need a business plan. In fact, many critics of the original measure said there should have been a business plan before that measure came forward. Many of those same people said there should have been a business plan before Measure B came forward. So here we are. We absolutely need it. My concerns are we're authorizing additional work, and we have these other moving pieces of is the Nocton-Lewis 3.3 million really needed at this point if we're already deciding where certain facilities are going to be located? I really think there should be a comprehensive discussion of those issues by the Measure B committee, which now has the power to approve the 3.3 million. How much of that do we really need to spend at this point? It's unclear.
Supervisor Williams?
I think those questions will be answered by this endeavor as we put together a business plan. We may figure out we can do one facility or another, or that we need to partner with a hospital. Those answers will get flushed out. If we send this back to Measure B, it's just kicking it down the road. What the public expects is that we begin providing services as soon as possible. Our legacy is making a difference in our community. It's not what the size of the building or what it looks like. It's the services that are provided, and that we're effectively treating mental health.
Okay, I'm going to go to Supervisor Haschak, and then we're going to take some action here. Supervisor Haschak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It just seems like with Measure B, we have so many balls in the air that we're trying to juggle, and there's lots of unknowns, and we just approved this $3.3 million contract, and part of that contract was to do 3 CRTs. And at that time, I was asking about the scope of what happens if they used Howard Hospital versus, Orchard Street, or, would that change the scope of that contract? And now we're looking at changing the scope of the contract again with just, using Orchard Street for the CRT. And so it's confusing for myself, and I'm sure it's confusing for the public. I certainly agree that we need to go forward with a business plan, and we should have had one a long time ago. And so I'm willing to approve going forward with this business plan. But I also think, like Supervisor McCowan said, we've got a lot of decisions to be made in a short amount of time, and we need to do right by Measure B. And I don't want to lose that $500,000 grant either. So.
Okay, Supervisor Williams, you,
Withdrawn.
okay, very quickly, Supervisor McCowan?
Yeah, so the direction would be for the executive office to perform the study, feasibility, operational feasibility, business plan, anything you want to call it, of the proposed Measure B funded facilities. So I guess I'm happy to support this, since that's the way this item's going. Who in the executive office would perform this work, or who would you contract with? What's the projected cost? Would it just be dusting off the previous study and updating the numbers? Do you feel you have clear direction here?
Chair Brown. Thank you, Supervisor McCowan. Well, initially, I did think, because I knew that Supervisor Williams had a copy of the study and was interested in it, initially I thought we could go back through and look at the numbers. It's from 2016, we're talking 2020 now, that we would be able to use this as the basis of a revised, updated study. Honestly, given that you have expressed some concern that these numbers were possibly not accurate from the get-go, then I would say to this board that we would need to hire a consultant to come in and do the financial analysis for us, which initially I thought we'd be able to just do this. But so in that regard, right now, I don't know. I mean, probably the first call that I would make would be to Mr. Kemper again to see if he was available. And we would look at the services. We do have a mental health consultant through Health and Human Services that we initially used for the RFP. As I said, we did look at staffing operational costs. So I would check with Health and Human Services, look at their mental health consultant, and possibly Lee Kemper. So at this point, given the concern that these numbers were not accurate from the get-go, we would look at a consultant. I don't know the cost. So basically, we would follow up over, almost immediately here, see what we can get, and then bring it back to this board for direction. One, that you would know the cost, two, the direction that we would be going. And so that's what I would say, and hopefully we would get it done before December 18th so that we could also bring that to the Measure B committee. And that's the best answer I could give you today. As far as what we had, what we could do is certainly the staff in my office and the Health and Human Services staff, we could pull together information and look at revising these numbers. I'm not certain that would be the best approach at this point. It may be that we do have to hire a subject matter expert to come in and work with us, as long as they could work quickly. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we do need to conclude this agenda item. Supervisor Jurdy?
Just briefly, I think what we're asking, though, is that there is new information that we didn't have when those previous reports were written, in that we have a working relationship proposal from Adventist Health. And so I think that's what we want the analysis to take into account, is what would the budget look like if we were to develop a proposal that's more than just this letter from Adventist Health.
Chair Brown, if I could.
Yes.
If I could ask for clarification, then so if we take residential out, and let's forget the $3.3 million Knockton Lewis contract. If we just look at residential, which would be what the $500,000 for the facility from the CHAFA grant, and we take that out. And so when we talk about the Adventist unsolicited proposal, we're talking about a 24-hour psychiatric facility. Is that right? That's right. So I think it would be easy enough to work with the Adventist and get some figures from them and to put together a cost analysis going forward if we looked at just Adventist and them doing the 24-hour psychiatric facility for us. Is that what you're asking? That really narrows the focus, and I think we can do that without a consultant. We could work between Adventist, mental health, and my office, and we could have something to this board. If that's what you want, we could do that, I think, fairly quickly. I need an answer.
Well, speaking for myself, if possible, at least through conference call, I still would like someone like a Lee Kemper to at least hear the discussion and be participating in the discussion.
Chair Brown, if I may, we could attempt to get a hold of Lee Kemper, and again, if he has the time and is willing to work with us, I guarantee you we will call him and get him involved. I just don't know what his schedule is today.
May I think the scope is having a subject matter expert help us maximize the return for this 1.8 to 2.1. What's the best return on investment? Maybe it's working with Adventist Health and doing another facility in addition. What is that? How do we break up those services so that we have the most available to the public as soon as possible?
Chair Brown, if that's
Yes.
the marching orders from this board, I understand that. So we have our CHAFA grant residential that is still going to the Measure B committee to come back to this board with a recommendation. We hope that the time frame will all come in together, and then we will work on the Adventist proposal. And I'm thinking, obviously I need direction from the full board, but I'm thinking that's what you want. I understand. We will get a hold of Lee Kemper to see if he's available or not, and we'll do our best with Mr. Wells to go ahead and try to get something together for this board. And again, I will ask, is that my direction? And then my office, along with Behavioral Health, we will work on this, and we will let the Measure B committee know that we are doing this, but this is our direction from the board.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor. Gentlemen, we need to bring this to conclusion. Supervisor Haschek?
I guess, thank you, Madam Chair. Just with all of that, if we do hire Lee Kemper to come back into the fold, then that would be an expenditure which would have to go through the Measure B committee, wouldn't it?
Chair Brown, I would say that all of this should go through the Measure B committee. I mean, we have expended multiple dollars over the last 2 years that has been general fund that we have not charged the Measure B committee. What you're talking about right now is more than appropriate for the Measure B committee. And again, that would be if Mr. Kemper or someone like Mr. Kemper works with us on this. Yes, Supervisor Haschak.
Okay. We're going to vote on the motion. Clerk, can you, it's the recommended motion, correct?
Yes, upon motion by Supervisor Williams, second by Supervisor Jordy, the recommended action is to direct the Executive Office to perform operational feasibility of proposed Measure B funded facilities.
Wait,
Ms. Angelo?
I'm going to ask for, I was thinking we were looking at just working with Adventist right now and getting that data quickly rather than all Measure B facilities. I just want to be clear. Am I right or wrong with that, please?
Would Supervisor Williams like to amend his motion? He
Yeah.
did make the recommended action.
I'm comfortable leaving it to staff to interpret it.
Okay, then, we got it.
Okay. I'm sorry, Supervisor McCallum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If that's our position, we could simply add to the recommended motion based on today's discussion.
That works.
Thank you, Supervisor. Okay, we're going to vote by the button.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you.
Was there ever any doubt?
So the board is going to go on break. Staff needs a brief time. It's been the 2 hours. I go according to labor law. Okay. So we'll be back in here at 10 minutes after.